Joining me on the show today is a special guest. We talk about unicorns a lot more now than we've done in the past, but India's first unicorn, InMobi, and what a journey it's had over the last 10, 11 years. Naveen Tewari, thank you so much for taking out the time and joining us on ET Now. Naveen, we've been discussing about unicorns so much over the last 1 year. India seems to be adding a unicorn every single month. But you sort of reached that pinnacle long back when it was just a word here in the Indian market. And so much has changed over the last 10, 11 years from the core legacy business to multiple entities. Quickly take us through the journey that you
by the way, the first time somebody called me a unicorn, I had to actually look it up. I had no idea what that really meant. But what came out in dictionary was very different from what it really meant. Look, we have had a phenomenal journey. We have been, we started off the company in the software space, in the B2B space, which is not the most, something that every consumer understands, but it's a software space. We feel very excited about that. And it's grown really well. Over the last few years, we've been very focused on innovation, and we feel that, innovation is the right way to go and build the next generation of businesses. We have innovated enough to now have 3 companies as part of our group. And so the core InMobi business, which started off 10, 11 years ago, is the foundational business for us. It's called InMobi Marketing Cloud. We recently launched a B2C business, which is scaled, and it's now the 3rd, 4th largest B2C platform in India. It's called Glance, and it's scaling very well. Very excited about the B2C opportunity that we are going for. I think we're fundamentally going to change the way consumers consume content in this country, so extremely excited about that. And we are building a platform for data scientists. It's our data business. It's called True Factor. It's a business which is, obviously kicked off from India, but really, kind of scaling in the US today. Latest of our businesses, we have now recently restructured the company into three subsidiaries, as I just talked about. All 3 have different paths. We recently raised some capital for Glance. So yes, we feel we are on a very interesting path, but I think the core of what we try to do is to look for technology innovation, and that's the way we think about how we progress, and that's the core thing that has allowed for InMobi to become what it is today.
All right. You sort of bet quite early on the internet mobile scene,
yes,
right early back. But before that, not many know that you'd sort of, started a startup in the SMS-based search business that did not quite take off, but you did spend a few years on that. How did the pivot really happen?
Yeah, look, there was a time when we started M-Coach.
I think it was called M-Coach.
M-Coach, yes, and it was in the SMS space. I think the idea was pretty decent at that point of time, and obviously we went for it. What we didn't do right when we chose that business was we chose what existed then. We weren't betting on where the world would be, right? And that's a very important aspect of any startup. Startups are all about your prediction of where the world needs to get to. And we didn't do that well, therefore we had to shut it down, and I'm glad we did. InMobi became a much larger business than what M-Coach could have ever been.
Yeah, interesting you made that pivot, really. But also, you've sort of bet quite early on the US market, which was hyper-competitive in its own sense. You had to take on global peers in the space like the likes of Google, Facebook. How did you really crack that market really quite early on?
Well, I think the first market in our overall strategy, one of the things that we did very differently was we actually went after the US market the last, which we went into the US market, I think 4 years after we had launched the company, maybe 5 years in its true sense. What we did differently was we went into markets like Southeast Asia first, and then we went into Europe.
We even went from there.
Yes, and we picked up learnings, but we also picked up market share and momentum, which allowed us to essentially get into markets like China even before we went into the US. And we went to the US last for the right reason, for the reasons which are obvious, which is to say it is the largest market in the world, but also the most hyper competitive market. So therefore, if we were to go to the US early, we felt we might have faced a lot more competition. And in the last 5 years of us being in the US, or maybe 6 years of us being in the US, our business has grown from a 0% from the US market to now over 50%. So we have really scaled well in the US also, and obviously given the size of that market, you can never ignore it.
You know, now that we talk about a lot of Indian startups going global, you know, InMobi did it, of course, quite early on than most of them went. But everyone was surprised with how you made the China entry.
Yeah.
You had those learnings, and you did come out and see that we are quite successful. I think the last numbers were close to a quarter revenue or more
That's
of that
correct.
really coming from China. How did that happen? Because everyone's view was, I kept asking you when you did that, was how are you going to really leave a mark on the market?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, China is a phenomenal place, and I think it is complex. By the way, don't get me wrong that it's not complex.
Yeah.
I think it's complex. But in any complex market, any complex problem in life basically has two ways to think of it, right? One, you solve for the hard problem. But once you solve for the hard problem and you come on the other side, then not that many are going to follow you. So you've done it, and you're gonna be somewhat alone in that new space. So yes, it was very hard, and we put a lot of effort. We were very, you know, lucky in getting a great team to kind of have, you know, be with us in China. And we've continued that growth because not many people make that jump. That's one part of it. The second is technological advances that we did really suited us in China. So that really helped us. Third, we did a lot. We behaved like a Chinese company.
I think you've spoken about how it's really important to be a local player in the market that you're.
Especially like China, which is a very inclusive market, or a very you know, segregated market, right? That doesn't really allow too many people to come in or allow too many people to go out, right? So we're seen like a Chinese company in China, and we did a lot of local partnerships, right? So we acted like one, we behaved like one, and we made the leap far too early, and it has stayed with us. And I'm glad that we did that, because it's a lighthouse you know, event for us, or lighthouse market for us right now.
Could you break it down in terms of your international markets? US the largest, China, how does it really pan out?
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's US is the largest, China is the second largest, and then comes India, and then comes the rest of, you know, different markets in Southeast Asia, specifically Indonesia. So that's the top 4 markets for us in the world. The first 2 markets follow what the market trends are also, which is the US and the Chinese markets control almost 2/3, if not more, of the advertising marketing business. By the way, all of this share of business, etc., is for the InMobi marketing cloud business, the first business. The second and third businesses don't necessarily have that level of global distribution right now.
I understand. But you know, how forthcoming were investors in the journey when you wanted to expand even in the China market, and how did you sort of convince investors quite early on that it was a market to bet on? Really?
Look, I think there were 2-3 aspects here, right? One, no one is gonna tell you tomorrow morning, get up and go become global, right? So that's not happening for anyone. I think one was, we saw very early that India is not going to be a large market to begin with, which was okay, and therefore we said we want to take, you know, small measurable steps to go after the global markets, but we want to start simpler by going after the Asian markets, and that was allowed. Once we made success there, that allowed us to get to ask for the next market, which was European market. We then asked for going after the Chinese market, and then the US. So we've taken our steps to get there, and I think that has allowed us to make the shift in the way we should have, and therefore, as the board and our investors saw this, they saw step-by-step progress, which in our case happened quite rapidly, because all of this we were able to cover in probably less than 4 to 5 years. So it really allowed us to get to scale there.
You know, you spoke about this phase of rapid growth, but also, Naveen, there's this phase between 2014, 2015, which was you know, quite a hard phase for InMobi to deal with, the massive exodus of employees that you saw. The business also took a hit. There were all kinds of speculations around who's going to acquire the company. You've sort of stood through all of that. What was that one thing that worked for you that time to sort of bounce back from those hard times, really?
Yeah, look, I think there were hard times. I think the business went through a tough period for those couple of years. I think there was nothing fundamentally wrong with the company, nothing fundamentally wrong with the technology, nothing fundamentally wrong with the employees that we had. We didn't actually have, by the way, on the contrary, we had the least attrition in that toughest period of our life. So I think a lot of the resilience was basically able to come in because we knew nothing fundamentally was broken. It was just a phase, and we had to, you know, get few things right. And we did. And in fact, because the spotlight went away from us in those few years, I think it did great for us, because in the,
you sort of ended up focusing on what you had to.
In life, by the way, what you do when the spotlight is not on you is far more important when the spotlight's on you. And I think in those years, we really innovated. We innovated on the core InMobi business, the marketing cloud business of ours. The creation and the foundational steps of Glance were laid out then. The foundational steps of True Factor were laid out then. So the seeds that were put in 2015, 2016, you are seeing them as big trees today, which we are celebrating as successes. But those were put in at the time when the things were tough for us, and we were able to focus and get those things in place because things fundamentally were correct for us. And therefore, I say to anybody I meet is that, if you have a downtime, like, let's utilize that to the best advantage, because people will not expect some things from you. Environment will allow you to make certain more mistakes. So, well, take it to your advantage and do something big out of it. And we're very happy that we've now created. And the fact that
the limelight was not on you sort of helped you focus on that.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And by the way, the thing which is very important is that your best people stay with you. And I think that happened with us. We didn't have an exodus. We had the best people never leave us at that point of time. If you look at my management team, by the way, 80% of my management team today has been with me for more than 5 to 7 years, which means that we are a 10, 11-year company. Most of the people have spent the majority of the company's life with the company. And that's what you need. You want people to stick around who can then help you build large businesses.
Which brings me to my question, how would you define InMobi's culture? Quite early on, you sort of built a very distinctive culture. You also had this boomerang initiative where anyone who wanted to be an entrepreneur could go out, start up. You feel there's always a welcome space back for you to join the company. And the fact that your employees have been your strength across the tough times as well. How would you really define InMobi's culture now, especially when, 11 years, different business entities, employees across the world?
Yeah, look, it's very simple. I kind of look at our culture as saying, what is the environment that I would love to be in? And you realize that the environment that anybody flourishes in, you will flourish in, I will flourish in, is the environment where there is trust and there is care. Those are the two fundamental things that people look for, and then they seek growth. Now, most companies and most people look at these things as just words. Our belief is that these should not be words that you put on the walls, but these should be things that are available in the halls. And therefore, how do you bring things from the wall to the hall is very important. And I think what we did is we truly started to trust our people. We genuinely do. We allow them to make a lot of mistakes, and that kind of goes against us at times. We really try to care for our people, and therefore they care for us in return. We truly trust our people, therefore they trust us also. And I think we've fundamentally gone to the core of the human psyche to try and understand this. And the simplest of the mechanism that we have applied is to say, what would I want if I were in a place? And if I would want that, then people would want it, and people have reciprocated very well, because that's why they love the place, and that's why they stay here, they spend time, they have no issues with it.
Got it.
And that's become, to me, by the way, that's the most important piece for any startup, any company out there, especially in the technology space where the only IP you have is your people, and they'll just go away somewhere next day if you're not taking care of them well.
Yeah, considering there's so many more job opportunities, startups, it's so much more difficult to retain talent, which we will of course discuss in our masterclass segment going ahead. But Naveen, what happens to larger plans of profitability, especially when you're focusing on newer business bets like Glance, that you'll be making significant investments at a group level? What's the roadmap really like?
Yeah, look, so we like to remain profitable. Certainly like to remain profitable in our core business for sure. And what we did as a result of this is we were very conscious about our investment into the new initiatives, firstly, because we wanted to remain profitable throughout. Secondly, we wanted to make sure that as these businesses grow and they require larger capital, specifically Glance, we actually went out and raised capital for it because that level of investment I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise if I didn't raise capital specifically for Glance. So it is important for us that we recognize also at the same time that these are different businesses at different stages of their life.
That's how you'd want them to be?
Correct. And therefore we have created them as different subsidiaries, and therefore we now look at these businesses as saying, all right, the InMobi Marketing Cloud, fast growing, large scale, profitable business. Let's keep it that way and kind of go down that path. Glance, fast growing, requires to capture market share, has few years before it looks at businesses differently. Let's raise independence on that business. So we raised capital, a week or two ago in that business. And same is the thinking around True Factor is to say, look, it's a fast growing business. We'll think about whether we raise specific capital for that or not, but at least it is seen as a separate business with different objectives that it should go after.
Got it. But larger plans of an IPO, would it be the legacy marketing cloud sort of a business over the next few years? Really, what's the roadmap on that?
Yeah, look, I think that business is pretty ripe for probably looking at an IPO at some point of time. Mind you, the advertising, the marketing space is so large, that we have so much headroom. So typically, when you want to go for an IPO, you want to make sure that there is enough and more headroom. We think there is so much headroom available out there in that business that it's not a problem for us right now. But yes, we will look for an IPO in the next
3-4 years?
Less than that.
All right. Yeah. But which sort of brings me to other issues plaguing the startup ecosystem. And you've been a very vocal entrepreneur right from the start. Your views around data localization, you have had a very strong stand that data of Indian consumers has to stay on Indian shores. Also, of course, we will see a lot more regulatory clarity come by. How crucial it is for Indian companies also that are building businesses?
Well, I think the fundamental difference going forward, IP going forward, that people are raw material, the raw material people need going forward to build any business is going to be data. Now, if that data is not, if you don't own that raw material, what business will our entrepreneurs build? Every business going forward will be disrupted because of data intelligence, because of artificial intelligence, right? And that can only happen if you have the data to feed into that system. Now, if you don't own that data, if your country doesn't own that data, somebody else will own it. So entrepreneurs can never really build something which is pretty self-sufficient that can compete at larger scales. And I think the country is really thinking about this right now. There are enough and more policy conversations which are happening.
Which are finally happening.
Yes, which are on those lines. And if that doesn't happen, it's in digital businesses, by the way, the time period between the time period it takes to essentially cause disruption is very short. So if you don't make those changes in less than 5 years, you've lost the battle. So I'm pretty glad to see the government essentially making initiatives which are going to essentially support this as we go forward. But it is imperative that we go control our own data.
Got it. Naveen, and I wanted to be candid on this question. There's always, over the last 2-3 years, been a larger claimer to protect the interests of Indian entrepreneurs, Indian companies. But the other side, the flip side to it is so much of foreign capital is really coming by. How would you really define what is an Indian company really? Is there a need for that, considering there's so much foreign capital that's flooding all across?
Look, this is a tricky one. And it's tricky because the capital, truly speaking, is global in India right now. There's hardly any local capital that's available for entrepreneurship or specifically for risk. And so therefore, you have to balance two things here. You have to balance the inflow of foreign capital, but at the same time, somewhere there are certain, with that capital, you're creating new industries, or you're disrupting existing industries. Getting some level of control on those industries is even more important, because otherwise, and so that fine balance between those two things is complex, and I don't know what's the right answer there going to look like. Clearly trying to give a lot more control into the hands of the Indian entrepreneurs is great, is good, but does it slow down the capital that's coming in? And so therefore there's an issue that we have to solve for, and I think a balance has to be struck. We'll see how that balance gets struck, but it's clearly an important issue.
And there's a fine balance really, considering there are issues on the both sides. But we all thought so, and we did see the implications of the massive exit in Flipkart with Walmart coming in, a lot more investor confidence in the Indian market. But we haven't, Naveen, really seen lot many exits, right? What do you think will it take for us to also send that message at the end of the day? Is it the IPO route? Is it otherwise strategic investments? For the Indian startup story, the fact that it's here to stay and tell a story.
Look, I think if the government were to look at, the government did a lot of great things to kick off the startup ecosystem to allow for investments to happen. And I think that cycle is now coming to a place where it has to show what you just said, which is to say show exits. The more sustainable way of showing large exits is an IPO market. Today, the Indian IPO market is not very strong from a tech perspective, and therefore, one has to actually sit down, and the government probably has to sit down and say, all right, what do I need to do to take the next 10 companies in our country and take them IPO in India?
Especially if you're talking about the top 10 or most of the unicorns talking about an IPO in the next few years, right?
Yes, because look, there are two ways one could think about this. One could say, we're going to make the IPO market so lucrative that the companies which ideally would have gone IPO in a NASDAQ market in about 10 years can go IPO in an Indian market, which can support this kind of tech investments. In 7 years, you have suddenly changed the investor sentiment around exits very differently. And I think that's what probably is needed, is to say we cannot only rely on global companies coming in and buying Indian companies, because that may not be the most sustainable way of building out a large base of startups. Because there may be many startups which do not fall in any bucket where a global company can come and buy them. Then how do you figure that out? And I think the only simple answer to that is a lucrative IPO market, which has a lot of support for the new age technology companies and a lot of support for the public investors who would want to invest in those companies.
Got it. Lastly, before we end this segment, what is it that really keeps you going? It's a high stressful role, really, being an entrepreneur over the last 11 years. What keeps you going? You also have to ensure that you're interacting with customers globally. You end up traveling a lot. You also have to meet with people on the government side, ensure you're also a vocal voice in the ecosystem. What really keeps you going as you go out and build that business?
Look, I've always believed that we all get chances. You have to be very lucky to get a chance.
Yeah.
And did get a chance to do something, and I think it's a good kind of a setup that we were able to make. And I think the play that one has to go for is to always figure out how can we have much more impact, right? I love India, to the core. I think many people do, and I think we see what we are trying to do. We see as a chance to be able to put India on a technology map in the world, and to showcase that great technology can be created out of India, innovation can be created out of India, and large-scale innovation that can impact the world can be done from India. And that thought, just that single thought, keeps us going. And it's not easy.
And we are, of course, seeing that play out in so many movies. Yeah. Wonderful, Naveen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Taking out the time and joining us. Thank you. Thanks.